Israel been really seeking affirmation from the US that they were not going to weaken down or water down any sort of narrative towards Iran with regard to nuclear weapons.
That's right. I don't think that the U.S. or Israel really committed to anything new in this agreement. The Iran deal has long been a source of tension between the U.S. and Israel. President Obama famously signed it, then President Trump left it, then President Biden has sort of tepidly been considering trying to keep a hand open to it. But at this point, I think the political realities in both Iran and the U.S. make it look like it's an unlikely outcome. So the question is, what's next? And the U.S. signing this just makes clear that the U.S. position on Iran has really not changed.
Yeah. It was interesting that they called it the Jerusalem Declaration. Many had thought perhaps that the US's recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel might shift under Joe Biden. So what do you make of this and also his intentions on this, his first visit to the region?
I think Joe Biden for some time has been a long supporter of Israel, more so than many other Democrats in the contemporary sense. And he's probably said that he's probably a Zionist. He talks about his father's support for the state of Israel. It really is something personal for Joe Biden, and that goes back decades. And so I think him calling it the Jerusalem Accords and him not really backing down from a number of the steps that the Trump administration took in Israel and in support of Israel is, I think, telling of the fact that Joe Biden is not a huge divergence from Donald Trump when it comes to Israel.
Let's talk a little bit about sort of relations between Israel and Arab nations. The most contentious issue is Joe Biden's visit to Saudi Arabia, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the acting Prime Minister said that Israeli Prime Minister said the hand was outstretched in peace to Arab nations, that they were ready and willing to work with them. How do you think relations between Israel and the Arab nations are progressing? We've seen Israel recognise a number of Arab nations. How genuine do you think this offer is, this attempt?
I think it's unprecedented, really. There's no question that the region is, from a U.S. point of view at least, more stable than it was than before the Trump administration. The Abraham Accords, in which a number of Muslim-majority nations throughout the region recognized Israel after 70 years of refusing to do so, is a huge step. And just the fact that Joe Biden is flying from Israel to Saudi Arabia is unprecedented. Prior U.S. presidents would have to slowly get close to Amman and not actually land, but then pivot to Saudi Arabia. But instead, he's not doing it at this trip, and he's flying directly to Saudi Arabia. That just tells you how contentious the lack of recognition is. And you could say that Saudi Arabia now is sort of a de facto signatory to the Abraham Accords. And again, that is a major pivot from where we were just 10, 15 years ago, where there might have been some intelligence and security secret discussions that were not in the public eye, but now there's sort of unprecedented discussions between the two nations.
Yeah, it's fascinating. But the trip to Saudi is contentious, the least of which is the death of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, the sort of diplomatic deep freeze Saudi has been. They now are the centre of a big problem for Joe Biden, and this is the oil crisis that he faces domestically.
It is the oil crisis. We just saw in the last day that U.S. inflation is at the highest rate in 41 years. And so there definitely is a domestic component to this. There's also a question of just how much can Saudi Arabia increase their oil production. But again, I think Joe Biden and the Biden administration would love to be caught trying to do anything they can to fight inflation. But, why is he going to Saudi Arabia? And you can say, it's pretty remarkable how long it's taken for Joe Biden to make this trip. Saudi Arabia was the first nation that President Trump visited to, the first foreign visit that President Trump made, whereas Biden has already been to Asia and Europe. He just finished hosting a bunch of nations from Latin America. And I think for the most part, the Biden administration didn't want to overemphasize the Middle East, and it really is telling, because he also said that he wanted to make Saudi Arabia a pariah. He wanted to prioritize China and climate change and not get bogged down on issues that other presidents have done. But I think Saudi Arabia, in his visiting there, really shows the pivot that they've made. And I think one senior administration said anonymously that it is better for us to be present even if it hurts. I think there's sort of a recognition in the Biden administration that it is a lot better to have Saudi Arabia on your side than to be against them on a number of issues.
As you say, though, he's not likely to win any major concessions from them regarding greater production. It's not going to really impact the price of oil that is sending shockwaves around the world. Does it embolden Saudi Arabia in terms of their behaviour?
That's a great question, and it's sort of an unknown, right? I think the Biden administration has been consistently caught between its values and interests, that old foreign policy debate saying there's the U.S. values of democracy promotion and just having hosted a summit for democracy recently, and then going to a sort of dictatorial regime in Saudi Arabia that really does not have full democracy whatsoever. And I think the Biden administration and a number of its officials, especially on background, will talk about that this is very much an interests instead of values visit. This is the U.S. seeing that the U.S. interests are served by keeping Saudi Arabia on side.
Close, yes. Let's come back to Israel, and of course he's going to be visiting the West Bank. You know, the plight of the Palestinians remains a big issue in terms of their standard of living, their security issues. Can he have any impact with Israel?
That's a great question. I don't think many in Israel or amongst the Palestinians are expecting that. I don't think Joe Biden wants to either. It's important to note that he comes to the office of the presidency with decades of experience, arguably more experience than anyone in modern history. And so he's acutely aware of how many prior U.S. presidents have gotten bogged down in the region, thinking that they and they alone can have some sort of miraculous deal to settle long-standing challenges from Iran to the Israeli-Palestinian debate. And it really is not something that anyone who knows D.C. well wants to get bogged down on in the Middle East. He's made clear, like I said, China, climate change, that's a priority. And the Middle East, he really just wants to keep it as stable as possible, including expanding the Abraham Accords, expanding recognition of Israel in the Arab world to get more stability there. And that includes as well, I think, getting some just stability between the Israeli and Palestinians. He does not want another Gaza war to erupt. He wants just for the U.S. to be able to pivot to Asia.
Yeah. Great to talk as always, Jared. Thanks so much.
Thank you.